I'm Haley, 32. My mother rolled her eyes the moment I walked into that courtroom. Not a subtle eye roll, but the kind that screams, "Here we go." Like I was the inconvenience in her perfectly crafted victim narrative. Then Judge Brennan froze. His eyes shifted from the paperwork to my face, and I watched recognition hit him like a freight train. "Wait," he said slowly, setting down his pen. "These allegations are against you." My parents had no idea who I really was, and honestly, that was the best part. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible to your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. So, let me back up 3 months. My grandfather died, Judge William Parker. 40 years on the Supreme Court bench. The man who actually raised me while my parents were off living their best lives, pretending I didn't exist. His funeral was massive. Every judge, attorney, and politician in the state showed up to pay respects. I delivered the eulogy. My parents sat in the back row, arrived late, and left before the reception. Classic Diane and Scott Morrison behavior. I hadn't seen them in over a decade. Not since my 18th birthday when my grandmother died, and they showed up for exactly 90 minutes before disappearing again. After Grandma Helen passed, it was just Grandpa and me. He was 73 then, still sharp, still working, still making sure I had every opportunity he could provide. Here's the thing about my parents. My mother got pregnant at 18 and decided motherhood cramped her style. My father was a promising hockey player with big dreams. A baby didn't fit the aesthetic, so they did what selfish people do. Dropped me at my grandparents' house when I was 3 months old and basically vanished. Oh, they visited twice a year if the stars aligned. Christmas and maybe my birthday. Diane would show up wearing designer clothes, kiss the air near my cheek, and spend the entire visit critiquing how Grandma was raising me. Too soft, apparently. Meanwhile, Scott avoided these visits entirely because Grandpa called him out for being a deadbeat. So I watched my father on TV instead. Every time the Bruins played, Grandpa had the game on. Not because he cared about hockey, but because he wanted me to know my father existed somewhere, even if he chose not to exist in my life. I never felt like I was missing anything, though. Grandma Helen and Grandpa William gave me everything. Real love. The kind that shows up. They were at every school play, every soccer game, every debate competition. They were my parents in every way that actually matters. When Grandma Helen died suddenly from a stroke, I thought my world had ended. I was 18, about to start college, and the woman who raised me was just gone. Grandpa carried both of us through that grief. And somewhere in that darkness, he started really talking to me about his work, about justice, about using power responsibly. That's when I decided to follow in his footsteps. I graduated top of my class from law school. Grandpa was there, beaming. My parents sent a card. Grandpa used his considerable influence to help me land a prosecutor position, and I worked my way up fast. Turned out I was really good at it. By 30, I was handling high-profile cases, complex financial crimes, corruption, things that made headlines. My parents had no idea. They probably thought I was working some boring office job, if they thought about me at all. Grandpa retired when I was 27, said he'd done his part, but really, he wanted time with me while he could. We had dinner every Sunday, sacred. He taught me everything about reading people, courtroom strategy, maintaining integrity when everyone else was compromised. When he died at 87, peacefully in his sleep, I felt that familiar emptiness return. But this time, I wasn't a lost 18-year-old. I was 32, and I had become exactly who he raised me to be. The will reading happened a week later. I expected maybe some books, his watch, personal items. What I got was everything. The house, investment portfolio, savings, life insurance, $3 million. Everything he spent decades building, he left to me, with one very specific provision in a sealed letter. My dearest Haley, you are reading this because I am gone, but my love for you continues. You are the greatest joy of my life. I leave you everything because you earned it, not through blood, though you are my blood, but through showing up, through loving me and your grandmother when others could not be bothered. Your parents made their choice long ago. This is mine. Be strong, my girl. I cried reading that. Not sad tears, but validation tears. The attorney handed me another envelope. Documentation. Bank statement showing Grandpa gave Diane $3,000 monthly starting when I was a baby, continuing for over 20 years. More than $820,000 total. Emails from her asking for more, texts promising to visit then canceling, letters from Scott requesting money for failed business ventures, a paper trail of their neglect and greed. Your grandfather anticipated they might contest this, the attorney said. He wanted you armed with proof. Smart man. Because exactly 30 days later, my attorney called. Diane and Scott had filed a lawsuit claiming undue influence, saying Grandpa was incompetent, that I manipulated an old man, that they deserved their share. I actually laughed. I was in court prosecuting a securities fraud case when I got the message. The irony. They assumed I was still that abandoned baby, that I'd be easy to intimidate. They had no idea I'd spent the last decade prosecuting people who thought they were above the law. They had no idea their father-in-law had prepared me for exactly this moment. And they definitely did not know who Judge Marcus Brennan was. Which brings us back to that courtroom. That moment of recognition. Judge Brennan had been Grandpa's clerk 23 years ago before becoming a judge himself. He knew exactly who I was. He knew I was a senior prosecutor. He knew what Grandpa meant to me, and he knew the people suing me were the same ones who couldn't be bothered to visit a dying man. My mother's attorney stood up, some guy named Richard Palmer, who specialized in exploiting emotional arguments when facts weren't on his side. Your Honor, before we proceed, I need to disclose that I had a professional relationship with Judge Parker. If either party objects to me hearing this case, speak now. I watched Palmer whisper frantically with my parents. Diane looked nervous. Scott looked annoyed. Finally, Palmer stood. No objection, Your Honor. Big mistake. Judge Brennan nodded. Then let's proceed, Mr. Palmer. Your opening statement. And that's when things got interesting. Growing up in my grandparents' house was like living in a completely different universe from whatever world my parents inhabited. And honestly, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. My earliest memory is being 4 years old, standing on a stool in my kitchen, making chocolate chip cookies. She let me pour in way too many chocolate chips, never got frustrated, just laughed and said the best cookies had extra love and extra chocolate. Grandpa would come home still wearing his robes sometimes, scoop me up, flour in my hair and all, and ask me about my day like I was the most fascinating person alive. I'd tell him about the ants I found or the picture I drew, and he'd listen like I was presenting oral arguments before the Supreme Court. They never badmouthed my parents to me, not once. When I asked why Mommy and Daddy didn't live with us, Grandma would say they were busy with important things. I believed that for years. Kids believe what they're told when the people telling them are kind. But I wasn't stupid. I noticed things like how other kids' parents showed up to school events and mine didn't. How friends talked about family game nights while I spent those times with people who went to bed at 8. How birthday cards from Diane and Scott arrived weeks late with messages so generic they could have been written to anyone. The first time I really realized I understood something was wrong when I was 7. It was the school Christmas concert, and I had a solo, 3 whole lines in Rudolph. I'd practiced for weeks. Grandma and Grandpa sat in the front row, Grandpa with his video camera, Grandma with flowers from her garden. After the concert, I saw my friend Emma with both her parents, taking photos and hugging. I looked at my grandparents and asked why my mommy and daddy didn't come. Grandma's face did that thing where she tried to smile, but her eyes were sad. They wanted to, sweetheart. They just couldn't make it this time. But I'd heard her on the phone the week before, calling Diane about the concert. The silence on the other end, the excuse about Scott's team holiday party. I learned to stop asking after that. Grandpa taught me chess when I was 8. We'd spend Sunday afternoons at the board, him explaining strategy and teaching me to think 3 moves ahead. He never let me win, which annoyed me at first. But when I finally beat him legitimately at 12, he was so proud he called everyone he knew. Grandma taught me gardening. We had our own section of the yard. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs, flowers. She showed me how to tell when the soil needed water, how patience and consistent care created beautiful things. I didn't realize until later she was teaching me about life, not just plants. They came to every soccer game, every dance recital, every debate tournament. Grandpa cleared his calendar no matter what case he was hearing. Grandma made elaborate snacks and signs with my name on it. They cheered louder than any other parents. I used to be embarrassed by their enthusiasm. Now I'd give anything to hear Grandpa's voice yelling from the sidelines one more time. Diane and Scott made their obligatory appearances twice a year, like clockwork. Sometimes they'd show up bearing expensive gifts that felt more like obligations than thoughtfulness, designer clothes I'd never wear, electronics I didn't need, things that said, "We spent money, so we fulfilled our duty." I remember one Christmas when I was 10. Diane showed up in a fur coat and diamond earrings, on her phone the entire time, barely looking at me as she handed over a wrapped box. Inside was a tablet. I already had one from Grandpa. When I tried to tell her, she waved dismissively. "Well, now you have 2. Give one to a friend, whatever." Grandma's face did that thing where she tried to smile, but her eyes were sad. They wanted to, sweetheart. They just couldn't make it this time. But I'd heard her on the phone the week before calling Diane about the concert. The silence on the other end, the excuse about Scott's team holiday party. I learned to stop asking after that. Scott was even worse. He avoided coming inside, staying in the car and honking until Diane came out. The few times Grandpa convinced him to come in, you could cut the tension with a knife. Grandpa had 0 respect for him, that was obvious, and Scott knew it. I remember being 12, overhearing them argue. Scott had dropped off Diane after a visit. Grandpa met him at the door. "One day, that girl is going to be grown," Grandpa said in that quiet voice that meant he was genuinely angry. "And she's going to remember who showed up for her. You still have time to change what she remembers." Scott laughed. Actually laughed. "Save the lecture, Your Honor. Diane and I are doing fine. Haley's provided for. That's what matters." "Provided for?" Grandpa repeated slowly. "Is that what you think parenting is? Writing checks?" "It's more than you did for Diane," Scott shot back. Wrong thing to say. Grandpa's face went hard. I raised my daughter. I was at every game, every recital, every moment. She chose to abandon hers. Don't you dare suggest I'm the failure here. Scott left and never tried to come inside again. As I got older, visits became even more strained. Diane would come alone most of the time. Scott was busy with failed business ventures, too busy to see his only daughter. I stopped caring around 15. By then, I'd accepted reality. They weren't my parents. They were just people I happened to share DNA with. I tested well in school, really well. Grandpa reviewed my report cards like they were Supreme Court briefs. Straight A's earned dinner at my favorite restaurant. Winning debate tournaments earned trips to Washington to watch oral arguments at the actual Supreme Court. He made education feel important. When I got into Boston University with a full academic scholarship, Grandma cried happy tears. Diane sent a text. "Good job." 2 words. That was it. College was my first time away from my grandparents. I called every Sunday, without fail. Grandma would tell me about her garden, the neighbors, mundane things that felt important because she cared enough to share them with me. Grandpa would ask about classes, professors, whether I was being challenged enough. Sophomore year, Grandma had the stroke. massive and sudden. She was planting tulip bulbs when it happened. The neighbor found her. I got the call from Grandpa while in class. His voice was so small, so broken. "She's gone, Haley. She's gone." I drove home that night, 6 hours straight, crying the entire way. When I arrived, Grandpa was sitting in her garden in the dark, holding the tulip bulbs she never finished planting. I sat down next to him. We didn't say anything, just sat there together until the sun came up. Diane came to the funeral. So did Scott. They stayed for the service and left immediately after. Didn't help with arrangements, didn't help Grandpa sort through Grandma's things, just showed up long enough to be seen and disappeared again. That's when I stopped making excuses for them. That's when I accepted some people are fundamentally selfish. Grandpa and I learned to live without her. It wasn't the same, never would be. But we had each other. Those Sunday dinners became sacred. Sometimes he cooked, usually grilled cheese. Sometimes I cooked, experimenting with Grandma's recipes. Sometimes we ordered pizza and ate from the box, watching old movies. The real value wasn't the food, it was the conversation. He started talking to me about his work in ways he never had before, cases that haunted him, decisions that kept him awake at night, the weight of knowing your ruling could change someone's entire life. He said one Sunday over Chinese takeout, "The law is supposed to be blind, but the people interpreting it aren't. We bring our experiences, our prejudices, our humanity to every decision. The trick is knowing when your humanity makes you more just and when it makes you biased." I soaked up every word. "You're going to be a judge someday," he told me once when I was 23, barely keeping up with law school. But he was serious. "You have that thing that can't be taught. Integrity. The ability to see what's right, even when it's not easy, even when it costs you something." After Grandma died, something fundamental shifted between Grandpa and I. We became partners in survival. Two people who understood loss and chose to carry it together rather than alone. The house felt emptier without her, but somehow never lonely, because we filled it with memories and conversations and this unspoken understanding that we were all each other had left. Law school was brutal, but I loved it. Every late night studying, every mock trial, every moment I wanted to quit, I thought about Grandpa, about the legacy he was building, not just in courtrooms, but in me. I graduated summa cum laude. He was in the front row recording everything. My parents weren't there. They sent a card. I'd stopped being surprised by their absence years earlier. Landing the prosecutor position right out of law school was Grandpa's doing, though I didn't know it then. I thought I'd earned it purely on merit, strong recommendations, good grades, impressive interviews. Found out later he'd made calls, vouched for me personally, and promised I wouldn't waste the opportunity. I didn't. I worked harder than anyone in that office, stayed late, came in early, took cases other prosecutors avoided because they were too complex or politically sensitive. By my second year, I was handling major cases. Financial fraud, political corruption, white-collar crime, cases that required weeks of document review. I quickly built a reputation for being fast, thorough, prepared, and relentless. The work consumed me. 70-hour weeks were normal. I lived on coffee, takeout, and the satisfaction of seeing guilty people face consequences. My personal life was non-existent. No dating, no drinks with colleagues, no time for anything except work and Sunday dinners with Grandpa. Those dinners remained sacred. No matter how exhausted I was, I always showed up, and he never missed one either, even when he was in his 80s and moving slower. Diane called once during that period. I was 28 and hadn't spoken to her in 3 years. She wanted help with Scott's legal problem, some business dispute. I asked how she got my number. She said Grandpa gave it to her. Mental note: discuss boundaries. Then I told her I was a criminal prosecutor, not a civil attorney. And even if I weren't, I wouldn't help Scott with anything. She called me ungrateful. I hung up. Grandpa apologized later. She had backed him into a corner, crying about how her daughter wouldn't speak to her. I should have known better. I wasn't angry. Diane had always been good at manipulation. I just said, "It's fine, but please don't give her any more information about my life. She lost the right to know those things a long time ago." When I turned 30, Grandpa threw me a small birthday party at the house. Just as close as friends, people I'd grown up knowing. Judge Marcus Brennan was there. He had been Grandpa's clerk 23 years earlier and had since become a respected judge himself. We talked for a long time that night about the law, interesting cases, and maintaining ethics in a system that often rewarded compromise. "Your grandfather talks about you constantly. He's incredibly proud of what you've become." My throat tightened. Grandpa rarely expressed pride directly to me, but knowing he told others meant everything. "He saved me," I said quietly. "Him and my grandmother. They gave me everything." Judge Brennan nodded. "He told me about your parents, about how they left you. I'm sorry you went through that." "Don't be. If they'd raised me, I'd probably be a completely different person, and not a better one." Financial fraud, political corruption, white-collar crime. Cases that required weeks of document review. I quickly built a reputation for being fast, thorough, prepared, and relentless. The work consumed me. 70-hour weeks were normal. I lived on coffee, takeout, and the satisfaction of seeing guilty people face consequences. My personal life was non-existent. No dating, no drinks with colleagues, no time for anything except work and Sunday dinners with Grandpa. Those dinners remained sacred. No matter how exhausted I was, I always showed up, and he never missed one either, even when he was in his 80s and moving slower. Diane called once during that period. I was 28 and hadn't spoken to her in 3 years. She wanted help with Scott's legal problem, some business dispute. I asked how she got my number. She said Grandpa gave it to her. Mental note: discuss boundaries. Then I told her I was a criminal prosecutor, not a civil attorney. And even if I weren't, I wouldn't help Scott with anything. She called me ungrateful. I hung up. Grandpa apologized later. She had backed him into a corner, crying about how her daughter wouldn't speak to her. I should have known better. I wasn't angry. Diane had always been good at manipulation. I just said, "It's fine, but please don't give her any more information about my life. She lost the right to know those things a long time ago." When I turned 30, Grandpa threw me a small birthday party at the house. Just his closest friends, people I'd grown up knowing. Judge Marcus Brennan was there. He had been Grandpa's clerk 23 years earlier and had since become a respected judge himself. We talked for a long time that night about the law, interesting cases, and maintaining ethics in a system that often rewarded compromise. Your grandfather talks about you constantly, he told me. He's incredibly proud of what you've become. My throat tightened. Grandpa rarely expressed pride directly to me, but knowing he told others meant everything. He saved me, I said quietly. Him and my grandmother. They gave me everything. Judge Brennan nodded. He told me about your parents, about how they left you. I'm sorry you went through that. Don't be, I replied. If they'd raised me, I'd probably be a completely different person, and not a better one. Looking back, I don't think I fully appreciated how much Grandpa sacrificed to raise me. He was 55 when I came to live with him permanently, an age when most people plan for easier years ahead. Instead, he got an infant, then a toddler, then a moody teenager. He never complained. He just showed up every single day and loved me. Diane resented him for that. I know she did. She saw our relationship and felt threatened somehow, like Grandpa loving me meant he loved her less. She could never understand that love doesn't work that way. You don't have to choose. You can love your daughter and your granddaughter. You can be disappointed in one while being proud of the other. But Diane needed to be the victim in every story. Her parents died when she was 8, so she was sent away. She got pregnant young, so she was trapped. She had to leave me with her parents, so she was persecuted. Never her fault, never her responsibility, always someone else's failure forcing her hand. I used to feel sorry for her when I was younger and still hoping she might become the mother I wanted, but somewhere around 25, that pity hardened into acceptance. She was who she was. She wasn't going to change, and I didn't need her to. Grandpa retired when I was 27, 40 years on the bench. It was a huge deal. News coverage, retirement parties, tributes from every legal organization in the state. He was gracious about all of it, but I could tell he was ready. Ready to stop carrying other people's problems, ready to just be a person instead of an institution. We talked about travel. Italy, Ireland, Alaska. He had a whole list, but his health started declining slowly. Nothing dramatic, just the natural wear of 82 years, fatigue, aches, slower movement. He didn't complain, but I noticed. I started visiting more often, not just Sundays. Weeknights, too. I'd bring dinner, make sure he took his medications. He protested at first, said I was treating him like he was helpless. But I knew he appreciated it. The house was so quiet without Grandma, without work to fill his days. He needed someone to talk to. We spent evenings talking about everything and nothing. Politics, old cases, people we knew. Sometimes we just sat in comfortable silence, him reading, me reviewing case files. Just being together was enough. You know, he said one night, raising you has been the greatest privilege of my life. I looked up from my papers. His expression was soft, wistful. I mean that your grandmother and I got to be parents twice. First with Diane, then with you. And honestly, the second time was better. Maybe because we were older and wiser. Maybe because we knew how fast it goes. Or maybe because you were just an extraordinary kid who made it easy to love you. I felt tears building. You and Grandma saved me. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in. He shook his head. We didn't save you, Haley. We just loved you. You saved yourself. You decided who you wanted to be despite everything. That was all you. Those conversations are what I miss most. That feeling of being completely known and completely accepted. Having someone who believed in me unconditionally. Not many people get that even once. I got it twice. When Diane occasionally called him, he was always cordial, never badmouthed her to me, but I could hear the disappointment after those calls, the sadness that his daughter had become someone he barely recognized, someone who called only when she needed something, usually money. He gave it every time, not because she deserved it, but because he was her father and couldn't help himself. I asked him once why he kept sending her money. She just uses it for stupid things. She doesn't appreciate it. He sighed. I know, but she's still my daughter, and I still have hope that maybe one day she'll figure out what actually matters. It's not the money, Haley. It's the hope. Have you ever experienced someone who took advantage of family generosity without giving anything back? How did you handle it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Palmer's opening statement was a masterclass in fiction. And look, I've prosecuted enough liars to recognize talent when I see it. The man was good. He painted Diane as this devoted daughter, cruelly separated from her loving father by manipulative grandparents who poisoned the relationship. He described me as calculating, someone who isolated an elderly man and positioned herself as his sole caregiver to secure an inheritance. Judge Parker was suffering from profound grief after losing his wife of 60 years, Palmer argued, his voice dripping with synthetic sympathy. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was cataloging every distortion for the cross-examination to come. Thomas stood for our opening. He didn't need dramatics. The facts were damning enough. Your Honor, this case is simple. Judge Parker was brilliant, careful, and intentional. He left his estate to the person who earned it through 32 years of consistent love and presence. The evidence will show the plaintiffs received over $800,000 from him during his lifetime while barely maintaining contact. Meanwhile, Haley Morrison showed up every single day. Judge Brennan looked at Palmer. Call your first witness. The plaintiff calls Diane Morrison. My mother stood, smoothing her conservative black dress. She dressed for sympathy. Minimal makeup, hair pulled back. She looked like the grievedy daughter. Almost convincing, if you didn't know better. She took the oath and sat down. Palmer approached with practiced gentleness. Mrs. Morrison, describe your relationship with your father. Diane's voice wavered. He was everything to me, my hero. When love, I finished evenly. Palmer hesitated, realizing his line of questioning wasn't landing. So, you deny influencing him in any way regarding his will? Completely. He was his own man, always had been. You can't influence someone who doesn't allow it. He did what he believed was right. Palmer shifted tactics. Your mother testified that Judge Parker blamed her for your grandmother's death. Did he ever say that to you? No. He was heartbroken, but he never blamed anyone. My mother's version of events exists only in her imagination. Palmer tried again. You claim your grandfather was mentally sharp, but did you ever see signs of forgetfulness? Everyone forgets small things occasionally. He misplaced his glasses once. That's hardly incompetence. He was reading legal journals until a week before his death. Palmer frowned, sensing defeat. No further questions. Thomas rose for redirect. Haley, what was the last thing your grandfather said to you? I swallowed hard. He told me he was proud of me, that I'd made him glad to have lived so long. The courtroom went still. Thomas nodded. No further questions, Your Honor. As I stepped down, Diane avoided my gaze again. Scott stared at the floor. Palmer looked drained. Thomas leaned close and whispered, You did perfectly. Judge Brennan called for closing arguments. Palmer stood first, grasping for sympathy. This case isn't about greed, he began, but about a daughter unfairly cut out of her father's life and his estate through manipulation and influence. He gestured toward me. Miss Morrison isolated Judge Parker, took advantage of his grief, and ensured everything went her way. Thomas rose calmly. This case, he said, isn't about greed. Let's review. Diane Morrison received over $800,000 from her father while ignoring him for decades. Her husband borrowed more after 3 failed businesses. Judge Parker wasn't isolated, he was abandoned. By everyone, except Haley, who stood by him until his last breath. This will reflects gratitude, not manipulation. It's justice, not influence. Judge Brennan's face was unreadable as he thanked both sides. I'll review the evidence and issue my ruling tomorrow. The gavel struck. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter. Thomas smiled slightly. Whatever happens, you told the truth. I nodded. That's all I ever wanted. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Brennan entered, expression steady. After reviewing all testimony and exhibits, the court finds no evidence of undue influence or lack of capacity. The will stands as written. The estate of Judge William Parker is hereby awarded in full to his granddaughter, Haley Morrison. Gasps rippled through the room. Diane's mouth fell open. Scott's face went pale. Palmer closed his briefcase in silence. Thomas squeezed my shoulder. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. As I walked out of the courtroom, sunlight spilling through the tall windows, I felt it. Peace. Not triumph, not revenge, just peace. My grandfather's legacy was safe, and the truth was finally on record. What did you think of the verdict? Do you believe justice was served? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. Down sharply. This court is adjourned. The sound echoed through the room like final punctuation on a story that had dragged on far too long. Diane covered her face, shoulders shaking. Scott muttered something under his breath that I couldn't hear, and didn't care to. Palmer packed his briefcase, avoiding eye contact, his earlier confidence gone. Thomas exhaled beside me. "It's over," he said quietly. I nodded, though the word over felt too small for what this really was. It wasn't just the end of a case, it was the end of decades of silence, guilt, and emotional blackmail. As we left the courtroom, reporters called out questions, flashes popping like tiny explosions. I ignored them. Outside, the air was cool and steady, and for the first time in years, I could breathe freely. Thomas turned to me. "You handled yourself perfectly. Your grandfather would have been proud." I smiled faintly. He already was. Across the parking lot, Diane and Scott stood together, arguing in hushed voices. I didn't approach. There was nothing left to say. They had chosen their path, and I had finally chosen peace. Later that night, I sat in Grandpa's old study, the same place we'd spent countless evenings talking about law, life, and justice. His chair was empty, but somehow it didn't feel that way. I opened the folder Thomas had given me, the court's ruling, the official end. My name at the top, his signature at the bottom. Final. I whispered softly. "We did it, Grandpa!" The house was quiet except for the ticking clock on the mantel, steady and certain. I closed my eyes and let the silence settle in. Not heavy, but calm. The kind of silence that comes after truth has finally been spoken. If you made it this far, thank you for following this journey. Do you think justice was served? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more true, powerful stories that remind us why truth always matters. Down came the gavel with the sharp crack that echoed through the silent courtroom. "We're adjourned." It was over. Just like that. 32 years of neglect couldn't be erased by a lawsuit. 32 years of love couldn't be invalidated by greed. Grandpa's final wishes would be honored. And better yet, my parents would have to pay for the privilege of losing. Thomas shook my hand. "Congratulations, Haley." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. As we gathered our materials, my mother approached, mascara streaking her face. "Haley, please, can we talk?" I looked at her. Really looked. She was crying, makeup smeared, looking older than her 50 years. For a moment, I almost felt something. Not sympathy, exactly, more like pity. "There's nothing to talk about, Diane." "I'm your mother," she said desperately, reaching for my arm. I stepped back. "You're the woman who gave birth to me. My mother was Helen Parker. My father was William Parker. They earned those titles by showing up. You're just Diane, a stranger who took my grandfather's money for 30 years and now wants more." "Please," she whispered. I made mistakes, but I'm still your mother." "No," I said firmly. "You had every chance to be my mother, every birthday, every Christmas, every Sunday for 32 years. You chose not to show up. You don't get to claim that title now just because there's money involved." She tried again to reach for me. I stepped back further. "Don't contact me again. Don't call. Don't show up at my house. Don't send letters or emails. We're done. We've been done since I was 3 months old. This just makes it official." I walked out of the courtroom with Thomas. Behind me, I heard Diane sobbing, Scott's angry voice telling her to pull herself together. But I didn't look back. Not once. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. Free from hoping they'd change, free from wondering if I was enough, free from carrying the weight of their failures. Grandpa had given me one last gift, proof that I wasn't wrong, that love matters more than blood, that showing up matters more than showing off, that I deserved everything I received because I earned it through years of simple, consistent presence. The first thing I did after leaving the courthouse was visit Grandpa's grave. I sat on the grass beside his headstone, next to Grandma's. The tulips I'd planted months ago were blooming. "We won," I said quietly. "They tried to take it, tried to rewrite history, but the truth came out. Your wishes will be honored." The wind rustled through the trees. I like to think it was him acknowledging me, letting me know he was proud, that he knew I'd fought for him the way he always fought for me. I stayed there for a long time, crying a little, laughing a little, thanking them both for saving me when my parents couldn't be bothered. I promised to honor their legacy, to use the inheritance wisely, to live the kind of life they'd be proud of. As the sun set, I finally stood to leave, but not before planting more tulip bulbs around their headstones. A reminder that love endures, that it grows back every spring, that it survives even when the people we love are gone. I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had in months. Justice had been served. The truth had prevailed, and I could finally move forward without looking back. Or so I thought, because life had a few more surprises in store. 6 months after the verdict, life had settled into a new rhythm. Work, gym, occasionally meeting friends for dinner, mostly just existing in the space I'd created for myself. The inheritance sat safely invested, growing quietly while I continued working because the work mattered more than the money ever could. Then, one Saturday morning, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in her 60s I didn't recognize. I opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" "Haley Morrison?" she asked. "Yes." "I'm Patricia Caldwell. I was your grandfather's neighbor for 30 years. I remembered her vaguely, the woman who'd found Grandma after the stroke. "Of course, please come in." She followed me inside, clutching a large envelope. "I should have come sooner, but I wasn't sure if it was my place. After the trial, though, I felt like you needed to see this." She handed me the envelope. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all in Grandpa's handwriting, addressed to Diane, but never sent. "I found them when I helped clean out his study after he died," Patricia explained. "Your grandfather asked me to help sort his papers. These were in a drawer marked unsent. I read a few. I hope you don't mind, but I needed to know what they were before giving them to you." I pulled out the first letter, dated 20 years ago. "Dear Diane, I'm writing this because I can't seem to say it to your face without anger creeping in. Haley had her dance recital today. She was wonderful. She kept looking at the audience, searching for you. I watched her face fall when she realized you weren't there. How many more times will I have to watch my granddaughter's heart break because you can't be bothered to show up?" I read through more letters, each one documenting another missed moment, another broken promise, another attempt by Grandpa to understand why his daughter had become someone he didn't recognize. Some were angry, some were sad, all were heartbreaking. One letter, dated just 2 years before his death, stood out. "Diane, I've given you over $600,000 over the past 20 years. I told myself it was helping you get stable, helping you build a life, but I'm starting to realize I'm just enabling your refusal to grow up. I'm going to continue the monthly payments because you're my daughter and I can't completely cut you off, but I'm done with the extra money. I'm done rescuing Scott from his failures. I'm done pretending this is help when it's really just prolonging your dependence. I hope someday you'll understand that the greatest gift I ever gave you wasn't money. It was Haley. You gave her to me, and she saved me after your mother died. She gave my life purpose again. I just wish you could see what I see when I look at her. I wish you could see what you're missing. I set the letters down, tears streaming. Patricia handed me a tissue. I thought you should know, she said quietly. He loved you so much, and he never stopped hoping Diane would change, even though he knew she wouldn't. Why didn't he send these? I asked. I think he needed to write them, but knew they wouldn't change anything. Diane was who she was. He accepted that, even if he didn't like it. After Patricia left, I spent hours reading through every letter. They were a chronicle of Grandpa's internal struggle between loving his daughter and accepting her limitations, between wanting to help and recognizing when help became enabling. The letters also revealed something else: how much joy I brought him, how proud he was of every accomplishment, how grateful he felt that Diane's failure as a mother gave him a second chance at parenthood. It feels guilty sometimes, one letter read. Guilty that I'm glad she left you with us, guilty that her absence gave me something precious. But I can't regret having you in my life, Haley. You are the greatest gift I never asked for. I called Thomas. I found letters. Grandpa wrote to Diane but never sent them. What did they say? Everything we proved in court, but more personal, more raw. Thomas, he documented everything, not just for legal purposes. He did it to make sense of it himself. That sounds like him, methodical even in his pain. Should I show them to Diane? Why would you? I don't know. Maybe so she understands how much she hurt him, how much she missed. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Haley, she already knows. Deep down, she knows. Showing her these letters won't change anything. It'll just make you feel like you need to manage her guilt. That's not your job. He was right. Diane's guilt was hers to carry, not mine to ease. I kept the letters for myself, adding them to the box of Grandpa's things I'd saved. They were proof of his love, his struggle, his ultimate choice to prioritize the person who prioritized him. A week later, I ran into Judge Brennan at a legal conference. "Haley," he greeted me, warmly. "How are you holding up?" "I'm good," I said honestly. "Really good. I'm glad. That trial was difficult but necessary. Your grandfather would have been proud of how you handled yourself." "Judge Brennan, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you ever talk to Grandpa about Diane? About the situation?" He nodded slowly. "Many times. He struggled with it. Loved her, but didn't like who she'd become. He felt guilty about that, too, like he'd failed as a father." "He didn't fail," I said firmly. "He did everything right. She just made different choices." "I told him that exact thing," Judge Brennan replied, "multiple times. But parents carry guilt in ways we can't always understand. The important thing is he never let that guilt override his judgment. He saw clearly who deserved what. That's why his will stood up in court. It was based on observation and facts, not emotion." That conversation stayed with me. Grandpa had struggled more than I realized. But in the end, he made the right choice. Not the easy one, the right one. That night, I drafted my own will. I was only 32, but the trial had taught me the importance of clear documentation. I left everything to charities: education funds, legal aid, programs for vulnerable children, just like Grandpa supported. Nothing to Diane or Scott. not out of spite, but because they'd already taken enough. I also wrote a letter to be opened after my death explaining my reasoning, just like Grandpa had done. Not because I owed anyone an explanation, but because I wanted the record clear. I wanted future readers to understand that my choices were intentional, based on principles and observation, not manipulation or bitterness. The months passed. Seasons changed. Life moved forward. I became senior prosecutor in my division, started mentoring younger attorneys, and maintained the Sunday dinner tradition, though now with friends instead of Grandpa. Different, but still sacred. And slowly, very slowly, I began to feel like myself again. Not the person defined by absent parents or devoted grandparents. Just me, Haley, building a life on my own terms. 1 year after the verdict, something unexpected happened. I was offered a judgeship. At 33, I'd be one of the youngest people ever appointed to the bench in our state. The governor's office called me personally. "Your record is exceptional. Your grandfather would be proud." He would have told me I was too young, I replied honestly, that I needed more experience. "Maybe," the governor smiled, "but we think you're ready. Will you accept?" I thought about it for exactly 10 seconds. Yes, I accept. The appointment process was intense. Background checks, interviews, public hearings. During one hearing, someone asked about the lawsuit. "Miss Morrison, you were involved in contentious litigation with your parents over your grandfather's estate. Some people question whether that demonstrates a lack of family values. How do you respond?" I looked directly at the questioner. I respond that family values mean valuing the people who show up for you. My grandparents demonstrated true family values by raising a child that wasn't their responsibility. They showed up to every event, supported every goal, loved unconditionally. That's family values. My biological parents demonstrated the opposite. The lawsuit wasn't about money. It was about honoring the wishes of a man who earned respect through 40 years of judicial service and 32 years of devoted grandparenting. The room fell silent. Then someone began clapping. Others joined. The appointment went through. Judge Haley Morrison. Grandpa's legacy continued. On my first day on the bench, I wore his judicial robe. The clerks had found it in storage, cleaned and pressed it for me. It was too big, hung off my shoulders, but I didn't care. It felt like he was there with me. My first case was a child custody dispute. Parents fighting over a 5-year-old, both claiming the other was unfit. As I listened to the testimony, I saw myself in that child, caught between adults making decisions based on pride and anger rather than love. When it came time for my ruling, I spoke directly to both parents. This child didn't ask to be born into your conflict. This child deserves parents who show up, who put their needs before their own egos, who understand that love is demonstrated through action, not claimed through biology. I'm ordering joint custody with mandatory co-parenting counseling. And I'm appointing a child advocate to ensure this child's voice is heard, because children remember who showed up for them. They remember who made them feel safe. They remember everything. Make sure what they remember is love, not war. After the hearing, my clerk said, "That was powerful, Judge Morrison." It was personal, but true. Word spread about the new judge who didn't tolerate parental selfishness. My docket filled with family law cases, estate disputes, custody battles. I brought the same principles to every decision. Actions matter. Presence matters. Consistency matters. Biology doesn't guarantee anything. 6 months into my judgeship, an estate case came before me. Adult children contesting their father's will, which left everything to his longtime caregiver. The facts were remarkably similar to my own. The children claimed undue influence. The caregiver claimed she'd earned it through years of devoted care while the children were absent. I had to recuse myself, too similar to my own situation. But before I did, I called both attorneys in chambers. I'm recusing from this case because of personal experience with similar facts. But I'll tell you both this. Make sure your evidence shows a pattern, not just isolated incidents. Show the court who was consistently present. That's what matters. Not biology, not expectations, presence. The case went to another judge who ruled exactly as I would have. The caregiver won, the children lost. Actions had consequences. As years passed, I developed a reputation. Judge Morrison was fair but firm. She didn't tolerate manipulation. She valued truth over convenience. She protected children and vulnerable people. She made decisions based on evidence, not emotion. 3 years into my judgeship, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Scott. "Haley, I need to talk to you." "About what?" "About Diane. She's sick. Heart problems. She's asking for you." "How sick?" "Doctors say months, maybe a year." I absorbed that information without emotion. "I'm sorry she's unwell, but I won't be visiting." "She's your mother." "No, she's not. We've been over this. She made her choices. I've made mine." "She has regrets." "I'm sure she does. Regret is easy when you're facing consequences. Tell her I hope she finds peace, but I won't be part of that process." "You really are cold." "I'm honest. There's a difference." "Goodbye, Scott." I hung up and blocked the number. Did I feel guilty? A little. But guilt doesn't obligate me to anything. She had 33 years to build a relationship with me. She chose not to. Her illness didn't erase that history. Work continued. Cases went and back. I made decisions that affected people's lives, always thinking about Grandpa, about his principles, about doing what was right rather than what was easy. 5 years after taking the bench, word came that Diane had died. Scott sent a brief email. No details, just thought you should know. I read it once and deleted it. I didn't attend the funeral, didn't send flowers, didn't reach out to Scott. She was a stranger who happened to give birth to me. Her death didn't change anything. People at work who knew my story asked if I was okay. "I'm fine," I said honestly. "She wasn't part of my life. Her death doesn't change that." Some people thought I was heartless. Others understood. I didn't care either way. I knew my truth. I knew what I'd lived through. I knew who showed up and who didn't. That was enough. 6 months after Diane's death, I was nominated for the state Supreme Court. At 38, I'd be one of the youngest justices in history. The confirmation hearings were brutal. Every decision scrutinized, every word analyzed, and, of course, someone brought up my parents. "Justice Morrison, your mother died." Held on a crisp autumn morning, sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows just as it had the day I'd been sworn in. When they unveiled the plaque, the William Parker Justice Center, I felt tears well up for the first time in years. After the ceremony, I walked through the grand hall, past portraits of every justice who'd served before me, until I reached his. My grandfather's steady eyes, his faint smile. I stood there for a long time, remembering every lesson, every conversation, every quiet moment that shaped me. A young law clerk approached, eyes wide with admiration. "Justice Morrison," she said softly, "your grandfather must be so proud of you." I smiled, my voice steady. "He is. I carry him with me in every decision I make." That night, I returned home and opened the drawer where Diane's ring still sat. I took it out for the first time in years, held it in my hand, and felt nothing. No bitterness, no pain, just closure. I set it beside my grandfather's gavel, the two symbols of the life I'd inherited, one from biology, the other from love. As I looked around the quiet study, I thought about everything that had brought me here. The abandonment, the trial, the years of service, the legacy now carved into stone. My story had come full circle. I turned off the light, glanced once more at my grandfather's portrait, and whispered, "We did it." Then I smiled, knowing he already knew. If this story touched you, if you've ever found family outside of bloodlines, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories about truth, love, and the power of showing up. Because sometimes the family we build is the one that saves us.
But that night it felt different. The words carried the same quiet strength they always had. You earned this. I traced them with my finger, remembering his handwriting, the steadiness in each line. Simple words, profound truth. I looked up at the sky, the fading sunset casting gold over the cemetery. "I did my best, Grandpa," I whispered. "Every day I tried to live the way you taught me, with integrity, with courage, with love." For a long while, I just stood there, surrounded by the peace of that place. The air was still. The tulips swayed lightly, and I felt them, not in some mystical way, but in the deep certainty that love like theirs doesn't disappear. It lingers. It shapes. It becomes the foundation for everything that follows. When I finally turned to leave, I didn't feel sadness. I felt gratitude. Gratitude that I had been loved so completely. Gratitude that I'd been given a chance to turn that love into something lasting, into justice, compassion, and truth. That night, I packed my bags for the first true vacation of my life. No court schedules, no cases, no deadlines. Just time. Time to see the world through the eyes of the two people who had made mine possible. As I locked my chambers for the last time, I glanced at the photograph on my desk, the same one from my 8th birthday. Frosting on my face, Grandma laughing, Grandpa looking proud. I smiled. "We did it," I said softly. Then I walked away, light and unburdened. Because in the end, this wasn't a story about loss or abandonment. It was a story about love, the kind that endures, the kind that shapes lives, the kind that becomes legacy. And as long as I lived by the principles they taught me, they'd never truly be gone. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that love isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. Subscribe for more stories about truth, resilience, and the kind of love that lasts forever. But I never tired of the words. "You earned this," it said. Through showing up, through loving us, through being you. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my pocket. I always carried it with me, a small reminder of what truly mattered. As I drove away from the cemetery, I didn't feel sad. I felt grateful. Grateful for 32 years with them. Grateful for everything they taught me. Grateful for the life they made possible. Diane and Scott never got to see who I became. Never got to celebrate my successes. Never got to be proud. Their choice. Their loss. But I didn't waste energy on bitterness. They were footnotes in my story. Biology that created me, but didn't raise me. Grandpa and Grandma were the story. Their love, their sacrifice, their example. That's what mattered. That's what lasted. I thought about writing a memoir, telling the whole story, but I decided against it. The story was already written. In court records, in legal opinions, in the lives of people I'd helped, in the precedents I'd set. That was memoir enough. Instead, I chose to live, to travel,
to read, to think, to just be. 60 years old, finally free from responsibility, finally able to exist without always having to prove something, fight something, or protect something. But here's what I realized. Even in retirement, I'd still carry them with me. Their voices in my head, their principles in my heart, their love in my soul.
You don't retire from family. Not real family. So this is how the story ends. Not with reconciliation or redemption for people who didn't earn it, but with peace, with gratitude, with the knowledge that real love endures everything. It survives death. It survives time. It survives everything. I'm Haley Morrison. I was raised by William and Helen Parker. They weren't my biological parents. They were my real parents, the ones who chose me, who showed up, who loved me unconditionally for 32 years. And when they left, they gave me everything. Not just money. Everything that matters. Integrity, strength, purpose, love. That's inheritance. That's legacy. That's family. And 30 years after Grandpa died, 52 years after Grandma died, they're still with me. Still guiding me. Still loving me. Because that's what real parents do. They never leave. Not really. They just transform into principles you carry, into strength you draw from, into love you pass forward. That's the truth. The whole truth. The only truth that matters. Family isn't who shares your DNA. Family is who shows up every single day for a lifetime. And if you're lucky enough to have people like that in your life, you protect them, you honor them, and you become worthy of their love. I did that. I became worthy. I honored them. I protected their legacy. And now, finally, I can rest, knowing I did right by the people who did right by me. That's not a sad ending. That's the best ending possible. That's justice. That's love. That's truth. That's everything.